Rodney Johnson. Any other nominations? Seeing no other nominations, I'd like to close the nominations. I need a motion to close. Motion made by Mr. Bratton. I will second that. Mr. Abbott, roll call, please.
Okay, so this is just to close nominations, then we'll do a voice call for your vote after this. Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Jim Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Now, as I call your name, please cast your vote from the list of nominees for president for 2020. Mr. Abbott?
Mr. Rodney Johnson?
Mr. Bratton?
Mr. Rodney Johnson.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Mr. Rodney Johnson?
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Abstain.
And Mrs. Sherman?
Mr. Rodney Johnson.
Moving on to the roll call for the candidate for vice president, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, fellow board members, for the nomination. I greatly appreciate it. At this time, we'll take roll call for vice president candidates. I would like to nominate Matthew Bratton. Would anybody else like to nominate a fellow board member? Seeing no other nominations, can we get a motion to close?
So moved.
I'll second.
I didn't get the motion.
Mr. Abbott.
Okay, thanks.
Second by Mr. Rodney Johnson.
Okay, to close nominations, Mr. Abbott?
Mr. Bratton.
I'm sorry, this is just yes or no.
Call to close.
Mr. Rodney Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
And Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Now we will cast a vote for roll call for vice president. Mr. Abbott?
Mr. Bratton.
Mr. Bratton?
Abstain.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Mr. Bratton.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Mr. Matthew Bratton.
And Mrs. Sherman?
Mr. Matthew Bratton.
Great, moving on. On the agenda next up is number 6, establishment of regular board meetings to be held at 6 p.m. on the following dates. And for some of you, for Jimmy and Jenny, or Jen that are new here, we try to plan obviously our vacations around here. We are pretty lenient on, changing the dates on some of these, moving forward. If anybody sees a conflict now, I would greatly appreciate it if you could speak up now.
Just as Travis and I were looking over things, just so the board's aware, we typically hold our Board of Education meetings on the second Monday of each month. The third March is typically held at the intermediate school in Lithopolis. And then again in September, you'll notice the location is also in Lithopolis at the intermediate school. The one date that you may want to pay attention to is April the 6th. That is not the second Monday of the month, and that is because of spring break. We can certainly change it if the board would like to. However, the 13th will be a day off of school. It's a parent-teacher conference comp day for our teachers that work. They do 2 conference nights in the fall and 2 in the spring, and they get 2 comp days for that, for their work those evenings. So the 13th would typically be when we would hold the meeting, but we do not have school that day. We can still hold a meeting, but Travis and I thought, traditionally it'd be better if we go ahead and hold it on the first Monday, which would be April the 6th. Not sure if you have any conflicts, but that's really the only date that is a little bit different.
Any questions, concerns?
Yeah, seems good.
Everybody's good?
Yep.
I know, we played it before. We had to change something up over here last year, but give leeway to it. Seeing none, can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Mr. Abbott made the motion, Mr. Bratton second. Can I get a roll call, Mr. Bigham, please?
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes. Number 7, establishment of planning sessions and additional monthly Board of Education meetings to be held at 6 p.m. on the following dates.
Again, just a few comments here. You know, talking with other superintendents and working in other districts, you know, different districts function different ways. We've traditionally held planning sessions where action is not taken. It's typically just to discuss often the finances, personnel, staffing, long-term planning for the district. Sometimes we have presentations from different, maybe a construction manager comes in or an architect comes in with some of the things we have going on right now. As Travis and I work with the administrative staff and we prepare for each year and beyond, we always feel that we really need that February date and that March date. We go ahead and schedule the April, the June, the July, and then we feel we definitely need, you know, one in the fall once school starts in September or October and the enrollment numbers have settled and we have kind of get a grip on things to see where the dust is settled once school starts. But some districts will not even hold work sessions or planning sessions. Some just have their liaison or their committee appointments, where they discuss some planning and then present to the board. I guess what I'm saying is it would not be unusual that, you know, we hold all of these, but it would not be unusual that we maybe cancel a couple of them. But I like them as placeholders in case we have things that we need to discuss. And we try to let you know several weeks ahead of time if we think that we're not going to be able to or need to hold that meeting, okay? So I think we keep them, is what I'm saying, but it's really up to you guys.
I'm good with these dates,
It's fine.
and obviously there's flexibility, we
Right.
changed a couple last year, so.
Sometimes that July one helps, maybe it, you know, if the planning session gets canceled and it has to become a special board meeting because we have to accept some late resignations or hire, sometimes that's done, at that time we can replace that too.
Any other concerns or comments? Seeing none, can I get a motion, please? Mr. Bratton?
I'll second that.
Mr. Abbott? Mr. Matt Bratton with the motion, Joe Abbott with the second. Mr. Sigum, could you have roll call, please?
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes. Moving on, number 8, request representative from each of the following categories be available for a presentation at the following regular board meetings. January through, so this, the way this typically works for you guys, we usually have a member, like tonight, we have special education, like gifted, Mrs. Wood, Mrs. Freeman presenting tonight. And then what we also do on top of that, we get to next, just kind of a heads up, we have a public participation from the community as well to speak. So tonight, Mrs. Wood and Mrs. Freeman will be speaking. Any questions in regards to these? Seeing none, may I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Is that Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Motion made by Ms. Sherman, second by Mr. Johnson. Mr. Jimmy Johnson. We're gonna be the
JJ.
JJ. Can I get a roll call, please, Mr. Bigham?
Yes. Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes. Moving on, number 9, board member liaison appointments for 2020. Typically, these are the 6 that we have liaison committees for. We typically have 2 board members. Currently, to give you an example, Mr. Abbott and myself are the committee for the facility management. And I know Mr. Abbott and I would like to continue that. We've been working on the project with the new elementary building, as well as, you know, talking about other facilities that we may need to have improvements for and what our plan is. So I know, Joe, would you like to still remain on that?
I would, I think it'd be beneficial.
Yeah,
Sure.
continuity. Okay. So Mr. Rod Johnson and Mr. Joe Abbott will be doing facilities.
So that's okay with everything.
Yeah.
Mr. Willis previously, Mr. Bratton.
Yeah. So for personnel, Mr. Bratton, would you like to keep personnel as one of yours too?
Yes.
We'll need to find somebody else to do personnel as well. If you would like to do that, we can discuss amongst the group, but who would like to do personnel? Mr. Jimmy, you would like to do that? Sure. Okay. Mr. Bratton and Mr. Jimmy Johnson for personnel. OSB representative, we've had 2 in the past. I've done it before. It's really keeping up with our Ohio School Board Association. We have a conference, and they have quarterly conferences as well. I've attended both. I can still maintain to do that. I'm a delegate for the for the district. I can do that if somebody else would like to help me out as well.
I'll do it. I like it.
You would be great for that,
OSBA,
Jim,
yep.
because of the legislation, and just having an education background. So Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Sherman,
Rod Johnson,
you're on, yeah.
RJ and JJ. Short name.
So I'm sorry, OSBA rep is, Rod Johnson and Jen Sherman?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. For policy, currently we have Mr. Abbott and, Mr. Rod Johnson to do that. For the timing of that, it's flexible for me to do that. We
Yeah.
typically meet in the mornings.
If I could say one thing there, so policy, the way it's developed, we use OSBA, legal services, they provide policy updates. We can modify that policy as long as it doesn't, trump federal or state law typically. We do sometimes make minor changes specific to our district. We get those policy updates 4 times a year, and we basically hold 4 policy committee meetings per year, 1 every quarter. And then we bring those policies to the board for our first reading and the second reading, and then they're approved after that on the 3rd reading. So it takes a couple months to go through that process in case there are any amendments that need to be made. So having a flexible schedule, we try to hold those during the day because Jennifer, my administrative assistant, is involved in that. Travis is involved, I'm involved. And then we have 2 board members that also discuss that policy before we bring it to the board. So if anybody,
I have a super flexible schedule as well.
I'm still on it, Jen, you don't do it, or however, Ron, it's up to you.
Finance, I normally don't like.
Yeah, I'll probably, if you'll do, keep on policy.
Yeah, I'll keep you in policy
Okay.
with Jen.
Okay.
okay, so Abbott, Sherman.
Okay. Safety, wellness, and health. This is, safety is our top priority here at the school district. We meet once about once a quarter, still the same with the health and.
Yeah, we
safety.
meet a couple times a year now. We have wellness committees at our building level, but we also have a district wellness committee. We discuss safety concerns, improvements we can make, student wellness, the social emotional side as well, just not clinic type health. We do meet a couple times a year. Sometimes it's hard. We meet right after school at 2:30 or 3. But if there's a board member that would ever want to participate, they certainly can. Mrs. Parker had a nursing background, so she served on that. So we definitely need at least one person to kind of be the primary contact there, and then a second to that as well as a backup. Wouldn't both have to attend, but certainly as a backup. So whoever would like to do that and try to balance out all these different committees.
I'll do that one.
Okay.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson for 1.
So you were backup.
Yeah, I was
before.
back up.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
And then finance.
Matt Bratton.
Mr. Bratton and I have done this the past couple times. Matt, I assume you'll probably still want to do that, correct?
Yes.
I can still stay and do it. So that's fine.
Unless board president's too much pressure, you can do it.
I'll continue doing that.
Yeah.
Yep. So Travis, we have the liaisons for 2020. For facility management, we have Mr. Abbott, Mr. Rod Johnson. For personnel, labor, and management, we have Jimmy Johnson and Matt Bratton. For OSBA representative, we have Rod Johnson and Jen Sherman. For policy, we have Joe Abbott and Jen Sherman. For safety, health, and wellness, we have Mr. Jimmy Johnson and Mr. Joe Abbott. And for finance, we have Mr. Matt Bratton and Mr. Rod Johnson.
Yep, correct.
Any questions or concerns you guys have in regards to the committees?
None.
Seeing none, if we can get a motion, please.
I'll second that.
Motion made by Mr. Matt Bratton and seconded by Mr. Joe Abbott. Can I get a roll call, please, Travis?
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes. Moving on to number 10, in order to promote the efficient operation of the schools, consider approving the following standard authorizations, A through E as presented, and given the superintendent. So A through E presented, gives that for the treasurer. And before we move on to the superintendent, does anybody have any questions in regards to those? Okay. And given the authorization to the superintendent to the best interest of our school with expenses reimbursed as provided by the board policy during 2020. These authorizations provided shall remain in effect until withdrawn by normal or by formal action of this board. A through E presented. Nothing in this shall require the Board of Education to employ or continue to employ an individual who has not provided a criminal records check satisfactory to the board or who has not satisfied any other prerequisite to employment created by law or board policy. Does anybody have any questions, concerns, or comments in regards to the treasurer and superintendent and their roles?
Nothing's changed with this one.
No, these are standard Ohio Revised Code authorizations, so Travis and I can continue to conduct the business of the school district. They have to be annually approved. Basically, for me, it's a lot of hiring and accepting of resignations, some minor purchasing, and attendance of professional development, applications for grants that I have to sign off on. Travis typically fills a lot of those out, and then I kind of sign off. And then Travis has lots of things that the revised code requires him to be able to do to conduct the daily business, and that's what you're authorizing us to do there.
Can I get a motion, please?
I would make the motion. Second.
Motion made by Mr. Abbott, seconded by Mr. Jimmy Johnson. Roll call, Travis, please.
Mr. Abbott,
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson,
Yes.
Mr. Bratton,
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman,
Yes.
and Mr. Rod Johnson.
Yes. Moving on, number 11, approve the following legal counsel for 2020 in addition to the county prosecuting attorney and pay for legal services from district funds. Brickler and Eckler for the general counsel and construction counsel, and Dinsmore and Shaw LLP for the bond issue. Any questions or concerns about this? You might want to go a little bit into regards to this, Travis, with these guys.
Bricker and Eckler have been our general counsel for ever since I've been here. Dinsmore and Scholl handles our annual disclosures for the bond issue. We have to present a report each year to the bondholders that have purchased our bonds. So they've been doing that for a while now. So I think I can speak for Mr. Hahn. We feel very comfortable with both of these firms.
Any questions?
No.
Seeing none, can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Mrs. Sherman, seconded by Mr. Bratton. Travis, if I can get a roll call, please.
Mrs. Sherman,
Yes.
Mr. Bratton,
Yes.
Mr. Abbott,
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson,
Yes.
and Mr. Rod Johnson.
Yes. This concludes the organizational meeting for 2020. We will now move into our normally scheduled board meeting. If anybody wants to leave, they can.
You don't have to start.
Pretty exciting stuff.
Give me an option to get
If you
out
want
if
to, you
want.
can, but
Yeah.
there's a ball game going on. Go cheer on the Bulldogs. Bye, guys. Yeah. Thank you. Cheer on the dogs. Thanks for coming back.
Bye, Bo.
Bye, Bobo. So you
Yeah.
Bye, good to see you. Thanks for coming. Bye, girls. Yeah.
All right, moving on. Approval of the agenda. We have a couple addendums that we need to note. The first addendum being 6B2 in your packet. It was given to you today on page 5 and 6. We need to be adding that. Give you guys time to check that.
What page was it?
It's on page 5 and 6.
Are we just adding his,
Page five.
just adding his name?
So we'll be adding that.
Okay.
Adding Henry Coisington to
Yep.
the list on the agenda.
And then the second addendum is on 6C7 on page 6. And that will be following the approved Chris Hughes on there. That one. And then the third one is on 6D4, page 6, under contracts and agreements.
High school membership.
Yeah. Any questions?
Just a resolution card, got it.
Yep. Okay. No questions or concerns? May I get a motion, please?
So moved. I'll second.
Motion made by Mr. Abbott, seconded by Mr. Bratton. Can I get a roll call, please, Mr. Bingham?
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes. Moving on, the approval of the minutes from the December 9th, 2019 meeting. I didn't see any changes that we needed to make. Everything looked pretty good. Going back through there.
I approved a couple times, I thought it looked fine.
Great. I'll go ahead and make the motion.
Second.
Jen seconds. Mr. Johnson made the motion. Mr. Sherman second. Travis, may I get a roll call, please?
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
And Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yeah, they should.
Some staying?
Correction, Mr. Jimmy Johnson abstained on the minutes from there.
Got it. Thank you.
I need to abstain. I abstain as well.
Yeah, I think we're gonna need a second.
Okay.
That's all right. She can still second. She can second but abstain.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Rod, yeah, I'm marking these real quick. So I said motion, Joe. Okay. Mr. Johnson, or Mr. Rod Johnson, motion, Mr. Joe Abbott second. Can I get a roll call, please, Mr. Bingham?
Okay, for the minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Some staying.
And Mrs. Sherman?
Abstain.
Okay.
All right, cool. Moving on to public participation, looks like we have just the gifted and special education this evening. No public participation, looks like. With that being said, we'll hand it over to you, ladies.
Cindy, you wanna go?
I'm gonna go first,
You're
yes.
up, all right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm not gonna stand behind the little tall.
That's for public meetings.
Yeah, you're good.
I guess I could stand there. Tonight I'm gonna talk about the continuum of services that we offer here at Bloom Carroll, as well as, the number of IEPs we do and the categories that we have our students divided up into. The first handout that I gave you is a continuum of services, and I've made a pyramid, from the most restrictive to the least restrictive environment. The least restrictive environment are our inclusion and our resource room settings. About 90% of the students in the district fall in these two areas. And then moving down, we have ESC classrooms. ESC classrooms are classrooms because we do not have enough low incident students in the Bloom Carroll district. We collaborate with the county for these classrooms for students that need behavioral interventions and moderate to intensive services. We have 2 levels of services throughout the county. Some of our students are housed in schools like Bloom Carroll, Amanda, Walnut Township. They're in a resource room setting, but then they go out into general education classrooms and are pulled back for the special services they need. And then we have special education or special schools. Prep for Success is a school that's housed at Forest Rose. It's separate and apart from the general education, and it's for students with intensive behavioral needs. If we have students that need services above and beyond the services that are offered here at Bloom Carroll or offered through the ESC, we look to special schools for outside placement. We've had students placed, a lot of the students that we place in special schools have intensive behavioral needs. There's a school in Newark, Eagle Wings, Buckeye Ranch, Foxfire, which is in Zanesville. And then the most restrictive services that our students have are homebound services. Homebound services can be for students who are medically fragile or have behavioral needs that are even more intense and much more intense than the outside schools. So we have a couple of students that receive those services. We have had students in residential treatment centers. We don't have any right now, but that's always an option also. Any questions about the continuing of services?
So just, I mean, this is for my own knowledge, as far as like homebound students, is that from K through 12 or is it?
Yes,
Okay.
K through 12.
We don't have any?
Yes, we do have two.
And sometimes it can fluctuate. The homebound instruction may be temporary due to a medical condition, temporary medical condition, an injury even. That may go on for, a month, a couple months of surgery. But sometimes, with the students that are in behavioral settings, Cindy and her staff, they do a really good job of trying to put that child in the LRE, the least restrictive environment. And if they're getting supports in a behavior class and they're showing progress and we can get them back into maybe a combination of a setting here at school in a traditional school, we certainly do that.
Yes.
If there's a need for more services, sometimes the student bumps back. So it's not to always put them there, it's to provide support for that child, help them cope with whatever the disability might be.
Yeah, and the goal is always to move up the pyramid.
So they're evaluated like yearly or quarterly?
They get a full team report, an ETR every 3 years, and then every year we evaluate their IEP, we do some academic testing, behavioral testing, and then, look at the IEP goals and the progress they've made on the IEP goals, making sure that we have the right placement, making sure we're making progress.
What did you say at the beginning? How many kids were in that upper?
Approximately 90% of our
90%.
students fall in that upper area. And it's really hard to break those two areas apart because we have students that might receive inclusion services for math, but they might be pulled back into a resource room for reading,
Okay.
vice versa. It's just all based on student need. Okay, any questions?
Cindy, not to put you on the spot a little
Sure.
bit, but I mean, from a board perspective, is there anything that you need from us or some resources that you need moving forward for our students?
At this time, no. I have a great staff. And, we use the ESC. Whenever I need help, I reach out. Teresa Nixon does consult work for us.
Right.
I reach out to her. Sean and I have conversations about students and the student needs and that type of thing.
I just think that I think a goal of this board is, we wanna make sure that every student has a great education here, and we don't want somebody to slip through the cracks, whether, if they're not in that 90% title range or whatnot. But if you ever feel like, from a special education perspective or anything like that, if you ever feel like you need something, relay that to Sean and let us be aware of that.
Oh, certainly, certainly. So the next page shows the number of IEPs that students are, that our students have, or that we have in each building. You'll notice that the primary building has 55 students receiving IEP services. 26 of these students are speech-only services. We have a lot of speech at the primary because of the impact that speech has on reading, the speech and language. So that's why you see so many in that building. 25 at the intermediate school. The middle school, we're dealing with 4th grade levels. We have 56 students on IEPs, and at the high school we have 40. Keep in mind, and I'm going to talk in just a moment, there's 40 students housed at Blue Carroll High School on IEPs, but we have a lot more students within the district that are high school students on IEPs.
Okay.
So in the right-hand column, these are all of the students that are not housed right inside our district who are receiving IEP services. We have 15 students who have chosen to take part in the John Peterson Autism Scholarship. If a student has a disability, this is a choice that a parent has. Even though they've taken advantage of the scholarship, we are still responsible for writing their IEPs, and depending on where they're receiving their services, we're also responsible for the ETR.
Do they get to choose where they go?
Yes, they do.
Do they tend to go one place?
No.
No.
No, we have some students who are on scholarship who might go to St. Mary's,
Okay.
St. Bernadette's, Marburn Academy. But then we have others that choose to homeschool their students, and then they take the scholarship money and purchase the services through approved, they call them service providers through
Sure.
DE.
Okay.
Okay? We have 12 juniors and seniors from Blue Carroll attending the Career Center.
That's awesome.
We play an active role in writing their IEPs and being a part of that. And then we have 14 students who are receiving ESC classroom services, either through the special schools or ESC classrooms housed in other buildings. We have 3 students who receive their services through the Department of Disability, Forest Rose. We also play an active role in participating in their IEPs. Students open enrolled or students in foster care. We have students whose parents might teach at another district who are receiving IEP services. So, you know, we serve as a district rep for those IEPs also. Then homebound students. Project Search is a program for students who are in year 13 of school, special education students. It's a program that's housed at Fairfield Medical Center. It is an amazing program, and they work on job transition skills. So the students have to go through an interview process to be chosen for this program. They have an IEP. The IEP is done through the Career Center, and then we have quarterly meetings with the Department of Disabilities and job transition coaches. Each quarter they work in like environmental services, they work in the food services. We've had students work in the X-ray department. They teach them how to interact with coworkers and how to be on time for a job, how to follow through with duties. If you ever have an opportunity to go to one of their open houses, it's an incredible program. So we have 52 students that are housed or receiving services outside of Bloom Carroll. So that's a lot of students. So 228 K-12 students receive some type of IEP service. Preschool program, our preschool program has really grown because of the lack of facilities. We have 2 Bloom Carroll classrooms that are housed out at Liberty Union. We have 1 classroom that's housed at the intermediate building, and then we have some students that are attending the preschool classrooms through the ESC out at Amanda. We have 20 students receiving IEP services that are going through the process to transition from preschool to kindergarten. So preschool program, which is run through the ESC, is a very active program. The goal is, or the philosophy is, early intervention. Hit those, a lot of them, the students have speech and language, OT, ET, and hopefully we can take an active role in that early intervention, and then by the time they get to school age, minimize some of the services that they need to be successful.
I have a quick question about the ESC classrooms. Is that when you're talking about how one school will house an autism unit and one school will house a, you know?
Yes, yes. And then here at Bloom Carroll, because of our building constraints and the lack of space.
We don't have one, right?
Yes, we do have
Oh,
one.
we do.
We have the high school moderate to intense classroom.
Okay,
So we have students from all over the county coming to that classroom.
good to know.
I have a question on preschool.
Yes,
So you talked obviously about the intention behind that is as they grow in, they improve, and services are diminished. Do we track that? Do we look at that?
yes.
And
These,
how's that perform? I mean, I'm just curious.
Oh, yes.
It's a great program. That's
So-
obviously-
preschool students, when they come into the preschool, they get a full ETR evaluation, a full team evaluation. We have IEP meetings. These students are on IEPs, and those IEPs are tracked. And then as they transition to kindergarten, like right now, we're getting ready, we have had planning meetings, and we look at the IEP goals and the progress they made, and decide which areas we need to retest as they transition to kindergarten, and then we will have full IEP team meetings. No student is taken out of the program unless they no longer qualify through that whole process.
The disabilities with the preschool students, they're not always intellectual disabilities. They could already be a behavioral disability between the ages of 3 and 5. They could be an occupational disability. Sometimes the parents walk rather than sending their children to a preschool classroom through the ESC consortium. It's called the Learning Steps Preschools, which are our kids and Amanda's kids and the Fairfield Union and Liberty Union. We all participated in the consortium. Sometimes they'll accept itinerant services where they're a couple times a week or once a week that somebody comes out to work on a speech or an occupational disability, and then if that's corrected, obviously, the goal is to always transition students out of those services and where they're supporting themselves and have overcome either whatever the challenge might be.
In addition to the 13 categories that we have for K-12, preschool has an additional category that school-age children cannot be classified under. It's called developmental delay, because a lot of times it is just a developmental problem with preschool students. So as we transition them to kindergarten, a lot of times we're looking at students that have that developmental delay category, and we're looking to see, do they have a learning disability? Are they still having speech and language? Is that what's causing the problems that they're having? So, any more questions about preschool? Okay. The last area is the disability distribution. These are estimates from the most recent data that I had from the Ohio Department of Education. Students can qualify for special education service in 13 categories, and I've listed the percentage of students at Bloom Carroll receiving services and the categories that they fall into compared to the state of Ohio. And you'll notice that the state of Ohio, 15.6% of the student population qualify for some type of special education services. At Bloom Carroll, 9.5% of our students qualify. In comparison to the county, we are on the lower end of students who qualify for special services. We have a couple of county schools up to 18 and 19%. Yeah. So right there is the breakdown. Just some things that we've done this year. New evaluations, we've done 16 new evaluations, 55% or 56% of the students have qualified. Katie once has completed 22 re-evaluations, those are the every 3-year evaluations. 77% of the students that we test continue to qualify for special education services. Does anybody have any questions?
I got one question for you,
Sure.
Cindy. How many kids within the district are on 504 plans?
69.
Okay.
Those aren't included already,
Those are not included in this, no.
but you service those as well.
Yes, we do. Any other questions?
Good job.
Thank you.
very
Good
much.
job.
Very interesting, thank you.
So I've got a couple handouts for you that go along with the presentation here. Okay, so I'm Caitlin Wood. I'm the gifted coordinator through the ESC. I just started off with kind of similar to Cindy's presentation, just some identification counts for you. So you have 2 papers in front of you. The one that is the spreadsheet of the numbers really gives you the breakdown by grade level, total count at each grade level, and then what content area we have students identified at those grade levels. So this graph just shows kind of the breakdown by grade level. In 2nd grade, we do start identifying for math and reading through math, and then we do superior cog screening in the spring, which is why you see that jump from 1st to 2nd grade and the big increase in numbers. And then in 4th grade, we do start to test with Iowa on science and social studies in addition to math and reading with the math. and superior cognitive ability again in 4th grade. And so that's kind of why you see some varying numbers there. There is 420 total students identified in Boone Carroll as of this year, and that actually changed this afternoon though, so 421 now. But. So on the next slide, I broke down the graph into 2 separate sections, K4, because that's kind of before we start identifying for science and social studies. That identification happens at the end of 4th grade, so it doesn't come into play until our 5th grade numbers. So I broke it down K4, and how many are superior cognitive, how many are math, how many are reading. And you can see the discrepancy here once we get into 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade that we do tend to have more students identified in reading. As of this year, the MAP test did change to where we can no longer identify at the kindergarten and 1st grade level for math and reading. So those identifications won't start until 2nd grade beginning this year. That is a new change. And then if you look at the 2nd grade numbers, thinking about our gifted service model that we have, in 3rd and 4th grade, we service with a gifted resource room with Amanda Lister. And if you look at our 2nd grade numbers, we have 24 identified in math, but for that reading gifted cluster, we have 35 students. So for her to be able to service them next year, 35 is well above our normal class size range. So we're gonna have to explore that a little bit as those students move into 3rd and 4th grade for our gifted service model for them. So then on the next screen, it gets a little bit more colorful here with our 5th through 12th grade identifications, because we do start to add in science and social studies and then a little bit of visual and performing arts as they move into the high school grade. So like I said, science and social studies we test at the end of 4th grade, so we start servicing those beginning in 5th grade. And then we get a lot of referrals for additional testing in those 2 areas because they've started identifying later. We have a lot of parents that refer for science and social studies in those middle grades. You'll notice we don't have any visual performing arts identifications until students hit 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. We start doing a visual performing arts screener in the spring, and so we bring all of the arts teachers together, and we've done this the last couple of years. I have not, but the gifted coordinator has, with other districts in the county, and done a whole arts fair where we screen and identify students in visual and performing arts as they get into high school there.
So why the jump between 10 and 11 in science?
I am not sure. So I actually have that circled on my graph here. So there is a really high number of students identified in science in 11th grade, which is why that count for students, it was 50 total students at our juniors that are identified. I'm not sure why there's such a high science identifier that year. Yes. Well, and that would apply for math and reading though too, so why the giant jump there? And in just that grade level, I'm not sure why. In 12th grade, they don't have that high science numbers either, so.
Who's the teacher?
Because the ACT science is a lot of reading and interpretation of data charts and graphs and kind of data analysis, which honestly they're getting quite a bit in 9th grade and 10th grade in biology and physical science. They're doing a lot of that foundation that helps improve their, it's really a science reason, right? That's what it is.
How do you identify? I have a question.
Sure.
How do you identify it? Because with CCP and everything, I assume it's like AC tests and the tests they still take, like with 11th and 12th. I mean, we count those as superior cognitive or gifted as well, even though they might be doing a CCP class at the branch. For example, how do you weigh them?
How do we identify them?
Yeah.
So there is an approved list of assessments that comes out from ODE on which tests we can and cannot use. So for instance, when we do our screeners in 2nd and 4th grade, we use MAP and Iowa and the COGAT to identify. We don't have another whole grade screener until they hit the ACT when we administer that to all of our students in their junior year. Okay, so some updates on things that we've done this year. So this year we did do all of our WEPs, our written education plans. It's similar to an IEP, but kind of on the other end. So this is for all of our gifted students. They all get a WEP if they are receiving services. We did all of them on Progress Book for 3rd through 12th grade. We don't currently service at K1 or 2, which is why we didn't do WEPs for them. I'm not sure whether this has happened in the past, but we are required to report progress on those WEPs, and so this spring we are going to have teachers complete progress reports and send those home with grade cards, just to update parents on how students are progressing on the goals that were written on their WEPs. At the third and fourth grade level, I also did parent-teacher conferences with Amanda Lister this year. For a lot of parents, that's their first experience with gifted education. And so we had a total of 30 parents that we met with and reviewed the WEP face-to-face with the parents, explain what it is, what services look like as they progress through grades. And then we go ahead and ask them to agree or decline on the WEP and give us some feedback on that. So a lot of parents really appreciated that. Some of the feedback that we got back from them was they had students in 6th, 7th, 8th grade that had been in gifted services all along, but didn't really understand how it worked. And so now being able to meet with us and ask questions, they kind of had a better idea of what things would look like moving forward. So that's something that we plan on continuing next year as well. Some other things that changed this year, ODE did update their assessment list. So in 2017-18 school year, they kind of overhauled gifted education. They came up with this approved assessment list. For the 18-19 school year, districts were grandfathered in so that they didn't have to buy new assessments based on what the approved assessment list was. But for the 19-20 school year, they said, no, you have to adhere to what's on the assessment list, and they've changed it every year a little bit as well. So it's been a little bit of a guessing game. But this year, one of the tests that we did used to use, Stanford Binet, we used for superior cognitive ability, was removed from the assessment list. OD also has said that you should have 2 assessments available at each grade level for referrals and rescreens. And so we went ahead and purchased Terra Nova for 5th through 8th grade to make sure that we had an assessment available for rescreen students when they are referred and then hit that rescreen score. And then the other change on the OD assessment list was that they also came back and said that math was not approved to identify at kindergarten and 1st grade. So moving forward, we're probably going to see a dip in some of our numbers because we did have very high identifications there for a while at the kindergarten and 1st grade level. So now that that has dropped off, some of our numbers should start to go back down, but it's going to take a couple years for that to roll in.
Quick question.
Sure.
So when you're saying we bought it, does the ESC purchase this and assess all schools on this, or is this something specific to a school?
So Bloom Carroll bought.
Okay.
Yes, so we actually shared, when they sell Terra Nova, you have to buy them a certain amount, and so we actually shared the purchase of this for 5th through 8th grade with Amanda Clear Creek, and then we also split some costs with the ESC to be able to service other districts that I work with as well. So that seemed to be the most cost-effective option, and it wasn't necessary for us to have so many tests available. We do need some available for 5th through 8th grade. So looking at PD, part of the gifted operating standards that ODE put out in 2017-18 was that teachers have to have 15 clock hours of gifted professional development every year to be considered a service provider. So we're currently in year 3 of that for our teachers that have been here for all 3 of those years. So of our 28 gifted service providers, 23 of them are in year 3, which means they're gonna have 1 more year of that 15-hour requirement. And then after that, the district will have to decide a set amount of ongoing PD that's required. So ODE asked that each district determine what level they want their teachers to continue receiving professional development to continue being gifted service providers. So all of the options that we've provided so far this year have been free for teachers, which has been great, and a lot of teachers have taken advantage of that. So at our countywide PD day, we had 3 gifted sessions that I led that we had a lot of teachers attend, so they could walk out of there with 3 hours pretty early in the year. We also started something new this year called Gifted Movie Nights. It's something I stole from the Southern Ohio ESC and saw that they were starting to do it. And so far the response has been great. So we had about 10 teachers that showed up, not just from Bloom Carroll, that's available to all of Fairfield County, show up for the November one, but we have a lot of teachers signed up for the January and March ones as well. So in January, we're showing Hidden Figures, and then in March, we're showing Little Man Kate. And so what we do on those nights is we watch the movie, teachers have something targeted to look for and track throughout the movie, and then at the end we have some discussions about what they saw, how it relates to students in their classroom, takeaways for things that they can consider when they go back into their classrooms. We also had quite a few book studies available. So in the fall we did an in-person book study with 1 middle school teacher and 2 high school teachers on Bold School, and it was about blended learning. And then we also have 3 online book studies that have been offered at various sessions throughout the year. The ESC has really jumped on the project-based learning train, and so a lot of the book studies and a lot of the professional development that they're providing is about project-based learning. So I've kind of jumped on that team to be able to offer those book studies to our teachers at no cost. If I help co-facilitate them, that knocks off the cost for them because you guys already paid for my services. So they've got one on project-based teaching, one on PBL in the math classroom, and then one called Just Ask Us, which is actually about student engagement. So we have quite a few teachers that are finishing up a book study right now, and then some more that are getting ready to start in February as well. Go back one more, sorry. And then the last thing, we do have our PD Day on March 6th that I'll be doing some gifted sessions as well. I actually sent out a survey today to teachers to get some feedback on what topics they'd like to discuss, how they want to use that time, and we'll use that to help plan our
So it sounds like they go with training. I mean, the way it's set up, you can give it to them all.
That's the goal, is we want them to be able to get all their hours here, preferably at low or no cost. And so most teachers take advantage of that and don't go outside for professional development. So looking ahead to next school year, I've been talking with Mr. Rozeski at the intermediate school, and he's interested in doing a gifted night before school starts, similar to the literacy night that they do. Again, just hearing from parents that they really liked being able to meet Ms. Lister, meet myself, talk about, okay, what does gifted look like? I don't know what this is. I wasn't gifted, so what does this look like moving forward? So being able to answer those questions before the school year gets started, especially because their student is moving out of a homeroom into a special classroom and they want to know what that's going to look like. Next year, we're also going to have to set a requirement for our ongoing PD that I mentioned. Now that teachers get past their 60 hours, and looking at what are we going to require teachers to continue to do to be gifted service providers. One of the options that is available is GT Ignite. It has a lot of online PD options, and they're willing to do a free district trial for us. And so that's something that we can look at next year as well. Looking at our WEPs for next year, we want to start really getting student input on what those look like and help having them become part of the process of setting their own WEP goals. And then we also want to hopefully work up to being able to report progress twice during the year. That's kind of the ideal, being able to report at semester and end of year versus just one progress report. As I mentioned before, we're also probably going to have to revisit our service model for a couple reasons. The state report card is going to be changing, and so looking at how they change the gifted inputs and what decisions they make on how those influence the overall rating for the district might change what services we look at adding or removing. And then also looking at some of our cluster group sizes. As those groups get larger than a normal class size, it becomes more and more difficult for that cluster group to travel together throughout the day to their honors class or their enrichment class. And so looking at alternatives of how we can service that cluster group, possibly breaking it apart or bringing some other teachers on board to be gifted service providers. And then a professional development opportunity for next year is looking at potentially sending teachers to one of OAGC, which is the Ohio Association for Gifted Children. They offer 2 really great professional development opportunities for teachers, and so looking at that as an option as well. Any questions for me?
Just a little background for us, if you don't know, Mrs. Wood was a 8th grade algebra and 8th grade math teacher for us here at Boone Carroll, and she came out of college, and then she moved to the high school and taught Algebra 2 for a while. We worked together over there, and she moved on from our district, but I knew she wanted to get into administrative opportunity. And if you don't know, she actually services a few other school districts through the ESC. She not only works with Boone Carroll, but Clear Creek,
Walnut Township.
So she's in 4 different districts throughout the week and helping run our gifted services program. She's doing a great job. This is her first year.
Very good.
Thanks to both of you.
Thank you, that was very thorough, appreciate it.
All right, thanks again to both of you guys, or ladies. Moving on, number 4, the treasurer's recommendations and reports.
Okay, item A is to approve the preliminary tax budget for fiscal 21 and submit to the Fairfield County Auditor. Real quickly, most counties in Ohio have waived this requirement. Fairfield County is one of 8 counties in Ohio that still requires this. It's basically a replication of the 5-year forecast. So instead of going through the actual tax budget form, which is very convoluted, I do use this as an opportunity, and I went through this with Mr. Johnson and Mrs. Sherman during our orientation, and the other 3 of you have seen this, as we just kind of lay this out as a starting point as we begin planning for next fiscal year. Again, the tax budget's for the succeeding fiscal year, which does not commence until July of 20, fiscal 21. So again, the tax budget, as Mr. Hahn and I talk, that we kind of approved today is in no means it's set in stone. It's truly a working document as we go through our planning sessions. We go through looking at our capital budget, our curriculum, our staffing, and then based upon those recommendations and those decisions, you can see how it will affect the budget because you've got this as a starting baseline. The second page, and we're on 15 of your, it's a little hard to see up there, but 15 of your electronic packet. This is really something that we've been talking about for a while now, and when we look at basically three huge components of our revenue with our property taxes, income taxes, and state funding. We all know where our state funding is going for this, at least for this biennial budget. Talked about the income taxes on a quarterly basis, but with Fairfield County going through a reappraisal, this new tax base was going to be a really important thing for us moving forward. And again, not to spend a whole lot of time on it, but just to kind of summarize it, when we look at our class 1 real estate and agricultural, the values, again, just looking at residential, increased by 20.2%, obviously much, much higher than we were anticipating. 19% of that was just because of the reappraisal. We only actually had 1% of new construction, which is a little surprising, but those were the numbers as they come through. Please know this is a year in arrears. So when we talk about year new construction, this is a January 1 of 19 is what's taxed in 20. So that it's confusing, but it's always a year in arrears. So certainly the new construction might ramp up next year. As you can see, we had forecasted 3.42%. So certainly there is some revenue above and beyond that we did not have in them, even as soon as the November forecast, a little over 809,000. That's just not the increase. That's the increase over what we had forecasted. One word of caution is all property owners have a window of January 1 through March 31 to appeal their new values, and I can assure you there will be some appeals, but most of the property appeals aren't those such that it will have a material impact on the percentages here. So if some of the bigger commercial ones were to, like Meyer and some of the car dealerships that are in our district, that might have a bigger impact, but I don't foresee a huge impact. Class 2 with the commercial industrial, an increase there as well of more than what we were anticipating. Public utility, as I talked about, did get appealed down. The Ohio Department of Taxation approved their appeal, so we didn't get quite the increase that preliminary numbers showed, but again, it was more than what was forecasted. So if we go down here, and again, this is just an approximation, but almost 900,000 above what we had in the forecast, again, just as soon, early as November. So we'll keep working. We'll have these numbers uploaded for the May forecast. The other big item to keep in mind, if you hear some complaints and people talking about their new tax bills and how are the rates changed because of the reval, kind of a good news, bad news thing. It's a good news for the school district, for the individual taxpayers, it's not so good news. The residential rate of 20 mils can't be rolled back any further. So even though the rates went up 20%, the values went up 20%, the rate stays exactly the same. So depending on how much your home value went up, the reappraisal, you're going to see a substantial increase potentially on this tax bill. Public utility is advantageous because it's taxed at the full tax rate. It's 46.5 mils. Three areas that I thought would get rolled back. Two of them did. One of them did not for some reason. The bond issue that was passed to build this building got rolled back by 12%. So it was rolled back pretty much in accordance with the reval. And the permanent improvement levy, they weren't shy about rolling that back pretty quickly. A whole 15%. If you remember, it was on the ballot at 1.2, and it's all the way down to 1.02 just a year after we started collecting. So,
Travis, let the new board members know that 2009 bond issue, when it was passed in 2009, how many mils was it?
That's a good question. 5.8.
And it's already rolled back to
3.7.
So that's rolling back because of builds?
It's both builds and the reappraisal, because the reappraisal and the new builds roll back because you're obviously now taxing a much larger tax base, so you're able to raise the same amount of money with less mills. to cover the debt payments that we have
Everyone's still
coming
paying
due.
the same rate.
Exactly, exactly.
So what does that mean? We'll pay it off early?
It could mean one of two things. If they're not rolling it back at the rate they should, it will be paid off early, and that's usually what happens. So it's, 2 or 3 years early maybe.
But they too did roll back, so it's
They,
positive,
they did roll back the 2009.
but not
yes.
the last one.
Exactly.
So why is that?
I think they're a little conservative. If when Mr. Hahn and I were doing the bond sale, we're sitting up there, and we did kind of front load the repayment schedule. So there's some larger debt payments at the beginning.
Sure.
I think the county auditor was a little conservative to say, let's get through these first couple of years of bigger debt payments before we really truly roll back the millage, has the debt and the principal, those annual obligations decrease
How often do they roll back?
every year at this time.
So those
Every
will
time
continue-
the tax base increases.
So they'll continue to roll back?
Yes.
And remember that, like Travis said, the PI levy was 1.2 mils on the ballot, it's already rolled back 1.02.
Some people are complaining because they're already paying less.
That's true. That's true. So the PI, I just kind of jotted this in there. The PI will raise, they're keeping it about 459,000, which is about what we had on the ballot. So the school portion only, and obviously your tax bill is comprised of a lot more entities than just the school, went from 29.7 mils to 29.02. So your rate dropped by 2.29%. If for whatever reason your house value went up lower than that, I doubt it from some of the numbers I've heard, your tax bill would actually go down. If your house value went up more than that, your bill is going to be higher than what it was last
Travis,
year.
do you know, across the county on average, I mean, I've looked at some other districts, and they all seem to be consistent with the increase.
I'm hearing 20% across the county.
Yeah, just not in the Bloom County.
Amanda, Byrne.
Yeah.
So the last page here, again, this is any questions you have. I don't know. You might hear some things as people get their tax bills and a little bit of sticker shock maybe, but at least from this perspective, the rate did decrease a little bit due to that rollback. The numbers that I've plugged in for next year, again, this is just the beginning. The real estate was changed based upon the new values. Pretty much everything else stayed the same revenue-wise, about a 3% increase. We've looked for our salaries and wages and benefits to increase a little bit next year with the raises that are already in place. Some other increases there. About a 3.33% increase. We have kind of a self-imposed curriculum and capital outlay freeze, if you will, but there's still over 407,000 currently in the this is just general fund. This does not include PI funds that we could in fact allocate to capital. Again, as we're going through these wish lists, if we're under that, at least you can kind of see what the overall impact would be.
Yeah, can you actually explain out a little bit, Travis, how
Sure.
we're not for Jim and Jimmy?
Yeah.
Just how we'll get to that, what we have in our general fund, and we're kind of like appropriating that.
Sure. Before we had the PI fund, any type of capital, a bus purchase, technology purchase, building repair, any type of capital expenditure we had to drain out of our general fund, which is really not what general fund budgets are designed for. They're designed, we're a service-oriented organization, so the majority of the budget's going to go to the salary, wages, the benefits, and then the contracted services. Some of what Cindy talked about with the ESC, some of those services that we have to get in place to benefit our students. It's really not designed to go out and pave and make those big ticket item replacements. So as we go through the wish list that Sean and I will compile from the various departments, we'll pull from both the general fund capital budget as well as the PI fund.
Where is the PI fund on there?
It's not on here.
Okay.
The tax budget's just the general fund.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So is it in that capital?
It's
Yeah, in
not.
there or not? Okay.
It's not. This is an additional,
It's separate.
has
Okay.
in addition to the 450,000 in the
Got it.
free fund.
Okay.
So again, we went from about a break even this year with the new values to looks like it's going to be a budget surplus and a 300,000 to 400,000 spending deficit next year to perhaps a little better outlook again, solely because of the new tax values. So that's where we are. We're just again complying with county requirement to submit this tax budget to the county budget.
Travis, real quick, have you updated the 5-year forecast yet?
Not.
With those figures at all?
I have not. It'll be done in May. We might do it a little earlier than
I
that.
just didn't know if you did it after you got those figures or anything.
I did it for these 2 years. This is
Yeah.
pretty accurate.
Okay.
I haven't started to look past next year.
We're
Yeah.
talking finance.
Yeah.
I'd just like to see like ballpark where it would be.
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, it's
Awesome.
it was better than we anticipated. But Any questions on the tax budget for fiscal '21 before we submit it to the county auditor?
Great. All right, seeing none, can I get a motion, please? Motion by Mr. Abbott, second by Mr. Bratton. Mr. Bacon, can you roll call, please?
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Item B, approve the December financial statements, total expense $9,542,334.97, including almost $6.6 million in SCOI expenses. Really not a lot to go through in December. Another low revenue month until we start collecting our taxes here in January and February. The board and employees were able to enjoy a medical and dental premium holiday. Employees had no premiums withheld from their check, and the board funds were not charged due to our balance with the consortium. So we normally time that out in December for obvious reasons, a little more take-home pay for the employees. So that was obviously a good thing for not only for the employees but the board general fund. Any questions on the December financial statements or the checks written during the month?
Seeing none, can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Abbott, second by Mr. Jimmy Johnson. Mr. Bacon, roll call, please.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Item C is approved setting the mileage reimbursement rate at 57.5 cents per mile per IRS guidelines. This is in our policy to be approved at each organizational meeting for the calendar year.
Any questions, comments? Seeing none, can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Motion made by Mrs. Sherman, seconded by Mr. Bratton. Mr. Bacon, roll call, please.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Item D is also in our policy to be approved at each organizational meeting, which is to establish a board service fund within the general fund to be used for expenses incurred by members of the Board of Education in performance of their official duties, and to appropriate $2,500 to the account. This has been a pretty steady amount to appropriate in this area. I found it to be sufficient. Normally not all used, but I think it should be there for those types of things like our OSBA conference. Any trainings, especially new board members that would like to attend, or any board member, if you wanted to attend a meeting, this is the account that those registration fees would be pulled from.
Any questions? Seeing none, may I get a motion, please?
Second.
Who was down there? Motion made by Mr. Bratton, second by Mr. Jimmy Johnson. Mr. Bacon, can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson? Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Item E, we're thankful to recognize the following donations to the Bloom Carroll Local School District. Has listed, again, several donations to our food service fund to offset any outstanding lunch accounts, and another donation to the BC Athletic Scholarship Fund in memory of Dan Shirley.
So do people just think to do this themselves, or is it something someone does all the time?
There was an article in the Lancaster Gazette where a lot of these companies on here actually went to 5 or 6 like county schools and helped pay off a lot of the outstanding.
Well, I saw the
debt.
big one.
Yeah.
I saw that article, but I mean, like,
But it's
like Brian and Jackie Moore, they just
Just kind of reach out to us, and it's kind of been a push here countywide.
A lot of people, especially at the end of the tax year, are looking to make donations, that they can deduct. And that's certainly one of them, but we have people kind of step up throughout the year and
That's
say,
so
hey, I'd
awesome.
like to
That's great.
have some lunch training. And make other donations too.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Is that what Richard Nixon?
It's grandson. Seeing no questions, I'll go ahead and make this motion.
I'll second that.
Motion made by Mr. Johnson, second by Mr. Abbott. Mr. Bacon, can I get a roll call, please?
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton,
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson,
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman.
Yes.
And finally, we have to approve the bus bid from Rush Bus Centers for the purchase of 2 78-passenger buses and 1 72-passenger special needs bus. The rate is $97,590 per year to be financed over a 3-year term. We do have 3 buses falling off of our lease next year. This is actually going to be a little less than the amount we were paying for those 3 buses, so we'll save a little bit. We did look at just a 3-year term. You can see the interest rate there, which is really favorable borrowing environment at this time. Certainly you do eat a little bit of interest over the 3-year term that you'll pay out, but the flexibility it gives you within your PI fund of not having to have that outlay of cash in year 1, it's just really why we do this. So I also included the specs within the packet. Again, 2 regular buses, 78-passenger, along with a 72-passenger bus that would also be able to be a special needs bus with the handicap, with the lift and the chair.
Any questions? May I please get a motion?
So moved. Second.
Motion made by Mr. Bratton, second by Mr. Abbott. Mr. Bigham, roll call please.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes. All right, thanks, Mr. Bigham.
Thank you.
Moving on for number 5, old business. We don't have any at this time. Number 6, Mr. Hahn is on the docket here with superintendent's recommendations and reports.
Okay, so a few things. In your stack of papers in front of you, you'll see that I brought a copy of the subcontractor bid analysis on our K-5 elementary school project. We meet every couple weeks to get progress updates. Things are going well. There's a lot of plumbing work being done and electrical work. They're getting ready to pour the slab. But the parking lots are in. We got our permits for the force main line and the water line. Utility work with natural gas will begin here pretty soon as well. But things are on track. But in terms of the subcontractor bid analysis, if you get questions throughout the community, obviously this is public information. People can see what contractors were interested in obtaining some of the work. And there's a lot of different divisions or parts of the project that have to be awarded at Summit Construction within their GMP, their guaranteed maximum price. They have a budget for each area, and they've awarded some of these contracts already to some of these subcontractors for different services that they'll be providing or equipment within the building. And you can see who the contract's been awarded to, who was bidder 2, who was bidder 3. And you can see, basically down at the bottom, the potential bid savings or overage. This will continue to fluctuate. Because there's a lot of other areas that have to be awarded to subcontractors. But especially in the next couple months, more will be available. And we've asked Summit to continue to provide an update to us, so the board is aware of, you get a question, who was awarded what, which companies bid on it, what was the price. If you have questions about why a company was selected, those are all things that any of us that we could answer, but we just wanted to keep you informed, so that's why we provided that. And again, it will continue to change.
Did the price of steel go up?
Steve, yeah.
Wow.
I think masonry and steel is up.
Masonry
Yeah.
was the highest.
Yeah.
Overall, the project's in great shape. We're on time, slightly under budget right now, and the goal is to continue to stay that way. And Summit's going to work hard. They've impressed us with their ability to be creative and keep prices down and not sacrifice the quality of the project.
So the wall's not going up yet? No, I mean, but that's not in this. That savings.
The Masons, they're in Division 4. It's 2K and IMI Masonry was awarded the masonry work, but that has not started yet. There's been some basic block. The footers are in,
Okay.
and the blocks are up above grade. But we're not taking the bearing walls up out of the
Right.
ground just due to a cost savings to the district
Right,
during the winter months. So, and it doesn't really change the opening of the building at all,
right.
or the completion of the project. So, so I just wanted to give that to you. Another item you have in front of you, you're invited to attend February 11th. I couldn't tell you at the next meeting, but it's the day after the February 10th board meeting that was approved tonight. There's a gentleman named Robert Post, and it's a long story how I stumbled on him, but I sent his information to Mr. Young, and I thought it would be something great to bring in to help support our middle school students. But there's a gentleman that actually lives in Lithopolis over at Jackson's Lake Drive. He owns a house back there. He's from Columbus, and he's a stand-up comedian. He's a presenter, a performer, very funny individual, but he's an individual that really struggled with school when he was a child in Columbus Public Schools. Didn't really do well, kind of always felt kind of lost in the middle school years and even high school years. But he does a really funny stand-up show, and I encourage you to go to his website. It's Robert Post, you can see on the handout, robertpost.org. But he puts on a program called How to Survive Middle School. And it really discusses, it's a stage comedy show to address challenges in middle school, such as bullying, social media, anxiety, depression, peer pressure, and the transition to high school. But we want to find ways to support our middle school students that are going through these difficult times. And Robert Post he's been all over the world. He's been on national programs. He's been on the Today Show. He's done presentations in Canada, Mexico, Japan, Turkey, Russia. He's got some really neat things out there, and it's just an interactive presentation with middle school kids through video and dialogue. But he'll be in here on February 11th. He'll be doing a show tailored to 5th and 6th graders at 9 o'clock, I think, and then 7th and 8th graders at 1 o'clock. So again,
9 a.m.
he's
and
local.
1.
He's right here in the Lithopolis and Bloom Carroll area. But just a really neat individual. I talked to him on the phone for an hour, and him and Mr. Young have worked out a show date on February 11th, okay? Other items I want you to be aware of, January is the school board recognition month. There are a couple certificates of appreciation in your packet. I just want to thank our board members that have been with us for a couple years, our past board members that are no longer with us, for their service to the district, and I certainly want to acknowledge 2 new board members here tonight, Mrs. Sherman and Mr. Jimmy Johnson, for their service to our school district, to our students. I think you'll find that it's going to be challenging, but very rewarding from the sense that I think you'll feel good about the things that you're doing for the students in our district, and you'll become a really good listener, I think, and then kind of an analyzer. And I just want you to know that if you ever need anything, if you have questions, I want you to reach out to me, come in and see me, call me, email me, whatever it may be, if you have questions or are unsure about something. But I just want to thank the entire board for their service to this board, for their service to the school district. Policy manual. Our policy manual for the board, if you ever wonder why, I wonder what our policy is. It's online. It's been updated. 2 new members would really not notice it because it just switched today. It's still very easy to find our board policies. You can search by keywords. You can search by section.
Is this the one you were talking about when we had our training?
Yes, yes.
Like it's a new form or
Yeah,
something?
so it's still in the same location on our website.
Okay.
But it looks a little bit different, but it still has the same outline.
Okay.
Okay, I think it's actually a little bit more user-friendly. So OSBA updated that, and I just wanted to make you aware, if you go there and think, hey, this is different, there's a reason why.
Nice.
End of the first semester is January 16th. We have a teacher workday on the 17th. The high school will have final semester exams for semester classes. On the next couple of days coming up this week. There will be on the 17th, I set up with CDA, which is Community Design Alliance. They're the interior designers that work with, and school planners that work with Shore Architects, our architect for our project. They will be, we have a bunch of furniture samples that have been brought in, and they will be displayed in the primary school cafeteria on January 17th, which is a teacher work day. And the K-5 teachers will have the opportunity in the morning between 9:30 and noon to sample lots of furniture. And Summit has a in their GMP, Summit has allocated a certain amount for furniture within the budget. And the teachers will have input within that budget on teacher desk, teacher chairs, student furniture, student desk, small group tables, cabinetry, mobile bookshelves.
How will that selection process work?
Teachers will have a ton of input,
Right down.
and then we'll find out what we can get within our budget and what meets the furniture design of each classroom.
Gotcha.
So Just want you to know that the teachers will have a ton of input on that process
That's awesome.
on the 17th. Parent-teacher conferences, the second round for the year are January 30th and February 6th. High school science fair is also on February 11th. If you're available that day, it'd be a great day to stop in here for 30 minutes or an hour. Maybe see that middle school presentation, go to the high school gymnasium, see the high school science fair
What
going
day was
on.
that?
February 11th.
Same day as the post?
It'll be in the morning, yeah. Primarily in the morning would be the best opportunity to see the science fair. Third grade reading guarantee, we got the results in December. I want you to know the results look very good. It's typical to have a high percentage of students traditionally, not only here but in other districts across the state. For students that still need to pass the third grade reading guarantee to be promoted to fourth grade, that test is conducted in October and late October, and then the students have about 6 other opportunities in our district between the state test and alternative assessments that we give to meet a third grade reading guarantee score. Just so you know, there are 30 out of 153 students, or 20% that still need to pass the third grade reading guarantee. 9 out of 30 of those students are on IEPs. There are a couple for speech, which you can't really make exemptions for. But overall, I commend Mr. Rozeski and his staff for the interventions they put in place to support students. I commend the board for going with the paper pencil assessment this past fall. That was a great decision. Just to give the board an idea, typically we have around 30 to 40% that still need to pass this time of year, and to come in with the first test results that we only need 20% to pass, I think it shows you right there that part of the assessment is really technology skills, not reading, when it should be based on reading. So again, good decision by the school board, I think. We gave the Iowa test, which is another administration. We had another 9 pass, so we're down to 21 students at this time, and 6 of those are in special education. So we have 21 or 15 students that need to still pass the third grade reading guarantee, and that number is way down at this point compared to past years. Okay, so good work, good decision making by Mr. Rozeski and the school board. That's it for my update. That's it. That's all I have.
Are they away from you that short?
Yeah.
Just a joke. Or just on my ticket.
Sean, last year though with the third grade reading guarantee though, I mean, by the end of the school year, we had 0 kids. I mean, they did a great job
Yeah.
last year doing that, so.
Yeah, that is,
that's pretty good.
But you'll get there faster this year without it, the
Yeah,
technology being in the way.
Exactly.
yeah.
So,
All right, so no questions about the report. Let's move on to 6B. Number 1, approve the list of 142 seniors for graduation on Sunday, May 24th, 2020, pending successful completion of all coursework and school requirements. 6B2, recognize the Bloom Carroll Band Student Representatives to the 2020 All-County Band Festival held January 8th, 2020. Middle school students include Ryan Bender, Logan Drury, Jackson Graham, Chase Hamilton, Lily King, Johan Ness, Alex Sherrod, Stephen Stang, Savannah Wild, and from the addendum, Henry Hoisington as well. The high school students include Kennedy Breen, Emmy Bringman, Sam Ebright, Kyle Griefey, Bryson Herman, Cameron Malone, Sarah Smith, Emily Swope, and Kyle Wellman.
all right, any questions? All right, can I get a motion, please?
Second.
I heard Mr. Bratton, and I heard Mr. Jimmy Johnson. Mr. Bratton made the motion, Mr. Jimmy Johnson made the second. Mr. Biggin, can I get a roll call, please?
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Okay, C, under personnel and employment, number 1, approve the substitute teacher list number 6 for the January 2020 as submitted by the Fairfield County ESC. Number 2, approve the request for a salary column change for Emily Butcher from a bachelor's degree with 150 semester hours to a master's degree pursuant to receipt of official transcripts and effective January 14th, 2020. 3, approve the following request for unpaid leave and dock days for the 1920 school year. That would be 1 day for Lisa Corwin, December 12th, 2019, and 5 days for Lisa Whitehead, January 23rd through the 24th, 2020, and January 27th through the 29th, 2020. 3C would be 2 days for Tisha Gildy, March 9th and 10th, 2020, and 1 day for Corey Moore, January 21st, 2020. The new board members, part-time employees working under 4 hours, they are not given personal days or any vacation days. So a professional staff member or a certified staff member that works full-time gets 3 personal days, and the board may approve up to 2 dock days per year. So if you have part-time people and they need to take off for a reason, we don't want it to be excessive, so we limit it to 5 days, which is similar to what professional staff can do with 3 personal days and 2 dock days, okay? Number 4, approve the following clinical experience students for the 1920 school year pending receipt of background checks. That would be Adrian Weimer from OUL with Abby Love at Blue Carroll Intermediate School, January 14th, 2020 through May 2nd, 2020. And approve the request for the FML leave for Janice Raver, bus driver, effective on or about January 10th, 2020, up to 60 days. Number 6, approve the following volunteers for the 1920 school year pending successful background check results. And those would be your Group A volunteers with background checks on file. They can work one-on-one with students and in small groups. Number 7, from the addendum, approve Christopher Hughes to provide 2 hours of home instruction for a high school student for the 1920 school year at a tutor hourly rate.
Okay. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Abbott, second by Mr. Bratton. Can I get a roll call, please, Mr. Bingham?
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
D, under contracts and agreements, number 1, approve participating in the OSBA Ohio Policy Service Client Website Update effective January 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2020. Number 2, approve entering the following programs, which would be standard for us: the OSB annual membership at a cost of $5,388, and the OSBA publication subscription at a cost of $150. Number 3, approve the resolution for the Blue Carroll Board of Education to participate in the Ohio School Boards Association Legal Assistance Fund for calendar year 2020 at a cost of $250. And from the addendum, number 4, approve a resolution card authorizing membership in the Ohio High School Athletic Association for the 2021 school year. Those are all standard agreements.
Yeah. Any questions? Seeing none, I will make the motion for this.
I second.
Motion made by Mr. Rod Johnson, second by Mrs. Sherman. Mr. Bacon, can I get a roll call, please?
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
And Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Okay, nothing under E. And under personnel and resignations, accept the resignation of Brittany Walters, lunchroom monitor at the high school, effective January 10th, 2020. She's been with us for several years. She did a good job, and she got another opportunity to better herself and her family, and we wish her the best of luck. She did a good job for us.
Any questions? Seeing none, can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Mrs. Sherman, second by Mr. Jimmy Johnson. Mr. Biggin, can I get a roll call, please?
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes. All right. New business. 7A, approve the following policies for our first reading. For the new board members, those are in the packet. Mr. Abbott and I met with Mr. Hahn and Mr. Bigham last month, and we did the first, went through those as seen through, or as presented 1 through 7. B, approve a resolution opposing the State of Ohio Ed Choice Scholarship Voucher Program. Any questions around policy or anything around the voucher on B? Seeing none, can I get a motion, please?
So moved. Second.
Motion made by Mr. Abbott, second by Mr. Jimmy Johnson. Mr. Bigham, can I get a roll call, please?
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Rod Johnson?
Yes. Number 8, board reports and information. A, Board of Education liaison updates. Number 1, facility management. I mean, Sean pretty much went all over everything that we have around the new building. I think Sean probably, looking down the road, we'll have to get a meeting together during the first quarter in regards to other facilities and look at what we can do, filter around that for other things with some of the funds that we might have in the permanent improvement, the first quarter, I'd say. Number 2, personnel and labor management. Mr. Bratton, any updates that you're aware of? OSBA representative, none at this time. You guys will receive, just real quick, Mrs. Sherman, Mr. Johnson, you'll receive like a magazine from the OSBA. It's got some pretty good information in there, especially around some training that they have like quarterly, especially for new board members. It's got some good information, talks a little bit about legislation around education. It's a pretty good read. Just want to make you aware that you'll receive that. Policy, we just went over that. Safety, health, and wellness. And finance, Travis will probably have a meeting here.
Try to meet in February.
Meet in February. So Mr. Bratton and I know.
Yeah, I will.
B, upcoming PTO booster and Board of Education meetings, January 14th, the elementary PTO at 6:30 at the intermediate school in the library. January 14th as well, music boosters meeting at 6:30 p.m. in the high school media center. January 15th, the high school PTO at 7 o'clock in the high school cafeteria. January 17th, teacher workday, no school, kids will be happy. January 20th, everybody's out of school to celebrate Martin Luther King Day. It's February 2nd, our Board of Education regular meeting here at the middle school library at 6 o'clock. And February 10th, the athletic boosters meeting at 7 o'clock in the middle school cafeteria. Any questions? Number 9, adjourn or recess. So moved. Mr. Bratton, Mr. Abbott, was that you, and then Mr. Bratton? Yes. Motion made by Mr. Bratton, second by Mr. Bratton. Mr. Bigham, can I get a roll call, please?
Mr. Abbott?
Yes.
Mr. Bratton?
Yes.
Mr. Jimmy Johnson?
Yes.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes.
And Mr. Rod Johnson.
Yes. And the timeout is 7:36.